The late summer sun was sinking over the wide plains of New Mexico, bleeding the horizon in streaks of fire and gold. The air smelled of dust, dry sagebrush, and the faint promise of an evening storm. Ethan Cole, a rancher with 20 years of weathered lines carved into his face, rode his bay mare along the edge of his land. His cattle grazed quietly in the distance, their silhouettes black against the glowing sky. He wasn't expecting anything unusual, just another day closing, another long night of solitude ahead. But as he approached the rocky outcropping near the creek, Ethan noticed movement, something that wasn't coyote or deer. His hand instinctively went to the worn revolver on his hip. He pulled the mare to a halt and squinted. There, half hidden behind a cluster of mesquite bushes, was a girl. She looked no older than 17, maybe 18. Her clothes were torn, her hair black as raven's wings and matted from travel, her face streaked with dust and dried sweat. She wasn't running. She wasn't even trying to hide. She just stood there rigid, her eyes locked on him with the intensity of a hunted animal. Ethan dismounted slowly, keeping his hands open where she could see them. "You lost?" he asked, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone he'd used to calm a skittish horse. The girl didn't move. She kept watching him, her chest rising and falling quickly. He could see now she was barefoot, her feet bruised and bleeding from walking miles over rough land. "I ain't gonna hurt you." Ethan tried again. "You need water?" That word, water, seemed to break something in her. She nodded once, quick and desperate. Ethan pulled the canteen from his saddle and tossed it gently onto the dirt between them. For a moment she hesitated. Then she darted forward, snatched it up, and drank greedily. The water ran down her chin, soaking the frayed collar of her shirt. Up close, Ethan could tell what she was. Apache. Her high cheekbones, the set of her eyes, the beads still clinging to a leather string around her neck, all spoke of it. He knew enough about the land and its people to recognize her heritage. And he knew what that meant. If townsfolk saw her wandering alone, she'd be in grave danger. When she finished drinking, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and finally spoke. Her voice was cracked, raw from thirst and silence. "I can't live without a man." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "What's that now?" She repeated, firmer this time. "I can't live without a man." Her English was halting but clear enough. The words struck him strange, carrying a weight that went beyond what they said. He wasn't sure if she was begging, bargaining, or warning him. "You out here by yourself?" he asked cautiously. She looked away toward the mountains in the distance, their jagged shapes darkening against the sky. "My people, gone." Her hand trembled slightly as she lowered the canteen. "Some killed, some taken. I ran." Ethan felt a heaviness in his gut. He'd heard the rumors, raids, skirmishes, soldiers pushing tribes farther from their lands. But standing here, face to face with a girl who had survived it, made it real in a way no talk in town ever could. "You're saying you got no one?" She met his gaze again. Her dark eyes were steady now, though they shimmered with something unspoken. Fear, sorrow, defiance. "Alone I die. Without a man I die. You let me stay." The directness of it cut through him. Ethan had lived alone on his ranch for near a decade, ever since his wife passed during childbirth. He'd learned to make peace with the silence, with the empty rooms and long nights. He never thought of himself as someone who'd be asked to save anyone again. But here she was, standing in the fading light, asking with words simple but fierce, a plea for life itself. "You even know what you're asking?" he said quietly. The girl straightened, squaring her thin shoulders. "I know," she replied. "You have land, food, cows. I can work. I can fight. But alone." She shook her head. "I can't." Ethan studied her a long moment. He saw the dirt caked on her skin, the hollows of hunger in her cheeks, but also the steel in her posture. She wasn't weak, not by nature. But she was right. Out here, with no one, she wouldn't last long. He rubbed his jaw, feeling the rough stubble scrape against his hand. The smart thing would be to ride away, pretend he never saw her. The safer thing would be to take her to town, drop her off at the sheriff's office, and let them figure it out. But he knew what townsfolk would do to a lone Apache girl. Mock her, lock her up, maybe worse. His horse stamped the ground, restless, as if urging him to decide. Finally, Ethan sighed. "Come on then," he said. "We'll talk more at the ranch." Her eyes widened, almost disbelieving. For the first time he saw a spark of relief break through the mask she wore. She clutched the canteen to her chest like a treasure and followed him as he mounted up again. The ride back was silent, except for the rhythmic clop of hooves and the distant call of a coyote. The girl walked barefoot beside him, keeping pace without complaint, though he could see every step must have burned. Ethan considered offering her the horse, but something told him she wouldn't take it. Not yet. By the time they reached his ranch house, the moon had risen high, washing the land in silver light. The house was a plain wooden structure, nothing fancy, with a barn and corral nearby. Smoke still lingered from the cooking fire he'd left smoldering earlier. He dismounted, tied up the mare, and turned to her. She stood just outside the fence line, eyes darting between the barn, the open fields, and the darkened windows of the house. She looked like someone stepping into another world, unsure if it would welcome her or swallow her whole. "You can sleep in the barn tonight," Ethan said. "We'll figure the rest in the morning." She nodded quickly, her relief visible in the way her shoulders sagged. She padded barefoot across the dirt, vanishing into the barn's shadow. Ethan lingered outside, staring at the stars burning across the sky. He couldn't shake her words from his mind. "I can't live without a man." He knew she didn't mean marriage or romance. Not the way most would hear it. She meant survival, protection, a shield against the cruelty of the world. Yet beneath those words was something more, a kind of honesty and desperation that made him realize she wasn't just asking for help. She was demanding a chance to keep living, to carve a space for herself in a world determined to erase her. And though he didn't understand why, Ethan found himself willing to give her that chance. The night passed quietly, broken only by the restless lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind against the barn's boards. Ethan barely slept. He lay in his bed, staring at the wooden beams above, listening for any sign that the girl had slipped away into the dark. But she hadn't. At dawn, when he pushed open the barn door, he found her curled in the hay, fast asleep, the empty canteen clutched tight against her chest as if it were a lifeline. For a moment, he just watched her. In the morning light, she looked younger, almost childlike, though the lines of hardship were still plain on her face. She stirred suddenly, blinking awake, her eyes wide and alert. "You're safe," Ethan said quickly, holding up his hands. "Just me." She sat up, brushing straw from her hair, then pulled the canteen close as if afraid he might take it back. "You can keep it," he said. "Got plenty more." Her lips twitched as though she wanted to thank him, but the word never came. She rose slowly, swaying a little from exhaustion. Her feet were raw, bruises spread across the arches, but she didn't make a sound of complaint. Ethan gestured toward the house. "Come on. You need food." Inside, the ranch house was plain but solid. A rough-hewn table sat in the middle of the room next to a cast-iron stove. Shelves lined with jars of beans, flour sacks, and a tin of coffee were the only luxuries Ethan kept. He lit the stove, fried a couple of eggs, and set them in front of her with half a loaf of bread. She didn't wait for permission. She tore into the food with a hunger that made him wince. It wasn't delicate, but it was honest. When she'd eaten enough to slow her pace, she finally looked up at him. "You asked last night," she said, her voice hoarse. "If I know what I ask?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Yeah. You said you can't live without a man. I still don't know what you meant by that." Her eyes flickered, sharp as flint. "I mean what I say. A lone woman dies. World too hard." She gestured toward the window where the wide land stretched on forever. "No food, no horse, no gun. No one listen. No one help a man. He makes a shield. He makes a place. Alone I have nothing. With a man I can fight to live." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You saying you're looking to be some man's wife?" "That it?" The girl shook her head firmly. "No, not wife. Not slave, I work. I give back. But a man, he stands. He says, 'This one is mine.' Then others listen. Then I breathe another day." The words sat heavy in the room. Ethan took a long breath, trying to measure them. She wasn't begging for marriage, nor asking for charity. She was stating a brutal truth about the way the world treated women, especially women like her, caught between cultures, hunted and mistrusted by both. "What's your name?" he asked after a silence. "Naya," she said. "Ethan," he replied, nodding toward himself. "Naya, you understand what you're asking ain't simple. Folks in town, they see you on my ranch, they're gonna start talk. Some might say you're trouble. Some might try to drive you off." Her gaze hardened. I know, but I'm not afraid of talk. Afraid of hunger, afraid of dying alone in dirt. Ethan rubbed his temples. He hadn't asked for this. He was a man who liked the quiet, who'd built his ranch out of sweat and stubbornness because he couldn't stand relying on anyone else. And now here was this girl, demanding a place in his world with words as sharp as a knife. You ever worked cattle before? He asked finally. No. You know how to mend a fence? No. You know how to shoot? She lifted her chin. Bow, knife, I can fight. Ethan couldn't help the faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. She was honest, at least. Well, ranch work ain't bow hunting. It's long, hard, dirty. You'd have to learn near everything from scratch. Think you can handle that? Yes, she said instantly. No hesitation? Her voice steadied, strong and unyielding. Better to work than to die. Something in the way she said it struck him deep. It wasn't youthful bravado. It was survival carved into her bones. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood. He walked to the window, looking out over the dry pastures, the fence lines that stretched on until they blurred with the horizon. For years he'd lived in silence. His only company, the low calls of cattle and the creak of his saddle. It had been safe, predictable. Lonely, yes, but loneliness had become his armor. Now this girl had stepped into his life with one simple truth, that survival out here wasn't just about fences and cattle. It was about people, about choosing whether to stand alone or to share the weight. When he turned back, Naya was watching him, eyes wide, waiting. You can stay, he said slowly, but you'll earn your keep. No free rides here. A breath of relief slipped out of her, so faint he almost didn't hear it. She nodded hard. I work. Then it settled. He crossed his arms. First things first, we'll fix your feet. Can't have you hobbling around. After that, you'll help with chores. And Naya, he fixed her with a stern look. You stay close to the ranch. Folks out here ain't always kind. You understand? I understand. The simplicity of her answer carried more weight than any promise. Ethan felt something shift inside him, like a door he hadn't touched in years had just cracked open. He didn't trust it yet, but he couldn't deny it either. As the day stretched on, Naya helped where she could, filling water troughs, carrying wood, trying to copy Ethan's movements with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She stumbled, yes, but she never complained. She worked until her arms trembled, until sweat ran down her temples, and still she pushed forward. That night, as Ethan sat on the porch smoking his pipe, he heard her humming softly from the barn, a tune unfamiliar, low and haunting. It carried across the warm air like a prayer. He thought again of her words. Without a man, I die. To her, he wasn't just a rancher. He was the fragile line between life and death, the shield she had chosen. And for the first time in years, Ethan realized he wasn't just protecting cattle anymore. He was protecting something far rarer, hope. By the third day of Naya's stay, Ethan knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't walk back from. It wasn't her presence in the barn, or the way she shadowed his every move around the ranch. It was the way she had already become a fact of life, woven into his daily rhythm as if she'd always been there. When he rose at dawn, she was already awake, fetching water from the well or kindling the stove fire. When he rode out to check the fence lines, she trailed behind with quiet persistence, limping on bandaged feet but never falling behind. Ethan found himself watching her with an odd mix of pride and worry. She didn't chatter, didn't complain, didn't ask for pity. She simply worked. Yet in every movement was a weight he couldn't ignore. She was clinging to this chance with all the strength she had left. But the world outside his ranch didn't share his quiet acceptance. On the fourth morning, Ethan rode into town for supplies. Dry goods, ammunition, coffee, the usual list. The streets were dusty, the air buzzing with the sounds of hammers and wagons, merchants calling their wares. He tied his horse outside the general store and stepped in. Inside, Mr. Halverson, the storekeeper, looked up with his usual sharp-eyed curiosity. Morning, Cole. Haven't seen you in near a month. Ethan grunted. Been busy. He loaded flour, beans, and salt into his basket. Halverson leaned his elbows on the counter. Heard a funny thing yesterday. Fella riding past your place swore he saw an Apache skulking around your barn. Any truth to that? Ethan's hand froze on the sack of beans. Slowly he looked up. A lot of things folks think they see from the road, he said evenly. Most of it ain't true. Halverson snorted. Well, I'd hope not. Town's on edge, Cole. Soldiers been chasing Apache bands again, saying some slipped through the hills. Wouldn't do your reputation any favors letting one hang around your land. Ethan's jaw clenched. I mind my own business. Other folks'd do well to do the same. Halverson raised his brows but didn't push it. Ethan paid, loaded his supplies, and rode out of town without another word. But the unease gnawed at him. By the time he returned to the ranch, the sun was dipping low. Naya was waiting by the corral, trying to rope a calf with more determination than skill. She brightened when she saw him, her guarded expression giving way to relief. "You come back," she said simply. Ethan dismounted. "Course I came back. Ranch don't run itself." But her words stayed with him. "You come back." To her, even that was never certain. That night, over stew at the kitchen table, he told her what Halverson had said. "They're already talking," he said grimly. "Word's gonna spread. Folks'll come asking questions, maybe worse." Naya set her spoon down slowly. "Then you send me away," she said. There was no accusation in her voice, only quiet resignation. "I not blame you." Ethan looked at her across the table. The lamplight cast shadows over her face, deepening the hollows of her cheeks but also catching the stubborn lift of her chin. She was braced for rejection, the way a wild animal braces for the trap's snap. "No," Ethan said finally. The word surprised even him, her eyes widened. "No? No," he repeated firmly. "I don't take in strays just to throw 'em back out 'cause some fool in town likes to gossip. You asked for a chance. You've been working hard. That counts for more than their talk." For a long moment, silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Then Naya lowered her gaze, blinking rapidly. She nodded once. "Then I stay. And I fight." Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if she meant fight to live, fight for him, or fight against the world itself. Maybe all three. The next week tested them both. Ethan put her to work mending fences, teaching her how to hammer nails and stretch wire tight enough to hold cattle. She blistered her hands raw but refused to stop until he ordered her to. He showed her how to milk the cow, how to gather eggs without spooking the hens, how to saddle a horse without getting kicked. Each task she attacked with quiet ferocity, as though every small success was another nail driven into the coffin of her past life. One evening, he found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. The sky was burning with sunset and she was humming again, the same haunting tune he'd heard before. "What's that song?" he asked, lowering himself onto the steps beside her. She hesitated, then said, "It is for the dead. My people sing it when someone is gone." Ethan's chest tightened. "Your family?" She nodded, gaze fixed on the sky. "Mother, brother, many. I run. I live, but them—" Her voice cracked, the words stumbling into silence. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't know what words could hold up under grief like that. Instead, he sat with her until the last light faded, and together they listened to the silence of the plains. But the decision to let her stay came with consequences. 2 weeks later, Ethan rode into town again. This time he didn't miss the stairs. Men on the boardwalk eyed him sharply, whispers passing between them. One even spat into the dirt as Ethan walked past. At the blacksmith's, his old friend Thomas caught him by the arm. "Cole," Thomas muttered, glancing around. "What the hell are you doing?" "Folks are saying you got an Apache girl living under your roof." Ethan met his friend's eyes steadily. "Not under my roof. In my barn, she works. She pulls her weight." "That ain't the point," Thomas hissed. "The town don't care if she's working. To them, she's Apache. They see her, they'll think you're harboring trouble. You'll have soldiers riding out before long." Ethan's jaw hardened. "She ain't trouble. She's a girl who lost everything. I ain't about to toss her to the wolves 'cause it makes folks feel safer." Thomas swore under his breath. "You're playing a dangerous game, Cole. Don't say I didn't warn you." Ethan left town with his blood boiling. By the time he returned home, he'd made up his mind. That night, he told Naya, "You're staying. No matter what folks say, I'll deal with them." She studied him for a long time, her dark eyes glimmering. Finally, she said softly, "Then I belong here." And though Ethan didn't say it aloud, he felt it in his bones. The decision was made. Come what may, he'd chosen her side. The weeks that followed tested Ethan and Naya in ways neither of them expected. Life on a ranch was never easy. But now every day seemed to carry more weight, because it wasn't just Ethan's survival at stake anymore. He had taken Naya in, and with that came responsibility. She had pledged to work. And with that, came the unspoken truth. The world outside would not forgive either of them for their decision. The first sign of trouble came when a pair of riders appeared at the fence line one morning. Ethan spotted them while repairing a gate. He recognized one instantly. Caleb Dorsey, a neighboring rancher with a sharp tongue and sharper temper. The other was his son, a lanky young man with a sneer plastered across his face. "Cole," Caleb called, reining in his horse. "Heard a funny rumor. Thought I'd come see for myself." Ethan stood tall, wiping sweat from his brow. "What rumor's that?" "That you've got yourself a little Apache pet running around here." Caleb spat into the dirt. "You know the law don't take kindly to harboring savages. Folks in town are already whispering." From the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed Naya standing by the barn, a bucket in hand. She froze when Caleb's gaze snapped to her. "There," Caleb barked, pointing. "Ain't no rumor now." Ethan stepped forward, his hand resting on the fence rail. "She works for me. That's all you need to know," Caleb snorted. "Work? More like trouble. You best send her packing, Cole, before trouble comes looking for you." Ethan's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "This here's my land, Caleb. Who I let on it ain't your concern." Caleb leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "You always were stubborn. But mark my words, harboring her'll bring you nothing but grief." With that, he tugged his reins and rode off, his son trailing behind. Dust rose in their wake, hanging in the air long after they disappeared. Naya set the bucket down slowly, her face unreadable. "They come again," she said softly, "with more." Ethan looked at her. She wasn't asking if trouble would come, she was stating it as fact. He nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready." The land itself seemed to join in the struggle. Drought crept over the plains, shriveling grass and leaving the soil cracked and thirsty. Watering the cattle became a daily battle. Ethan showed Naya how to dig new channels from the creek, how to ration water, how to recognize when a cow was near collapse. She learned fast. Too fast. Every day her hands grew rougher, her body leaner, her eyes sharper. She moved with purpose, never wasting a step. One evening, after a long day of hauling water, Ethan found her leaning against the corral fence, staring at the herd. "Harder than you thought?" he asked. Naya shook her head. "Hard, yes, but good. Hard means I live. Every day I work, I win against death." Ethan studied her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was transforming. The scared girl he'd found in the mesquite brush was hardening into something stronger, like steel tempered by fire. But the greatest test came not from drought or gossip, but from men who lived outside the law. It happened one dusky evening. Ethan and Naya were securing the cattle for the night when the sound of hooves thundered across the ridge. 4 riders armed and masked with bandanas swept down on the ranch like a storm. "Stay low," Ethan barked, shoving Naya toward the barn. He drew his revolver just as the outlaws fired warning shots into the air. "Easy there, Cole," one of them shouted, circling his horse. "We ain't here for your cows. We're here for the girl." Ethan's blood ran cold. "She's under my protection." The outlaw laughed harshly. "Ain't no such thing out here. Apache belongs in chains or in the ground. Hand her over and we'll be gone." Ethan stood firm, revolver steady. "You'll have to go through me first." The air hung thick with tension. The outlaws shifted in their saddles, hands twitching near their guns. Then from the shadows of the barn, Naya's voice rang out. "No." She stepped forward, bow in hand, an arrow notched and aimed at the nearest outlaw. Her stance was steady, her eyes cold. The men laughed at first until she loosed the arrow. It whistled through the air and buried itself in one rider's shoulder, knocking him from his horse. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked, bullets sparking off the corral. Ethan fired back, dropping one outlaw's hat clean off his head. Naya loosed another arrow, grazing a horse and sending the beast into a frenzy. The fight didn't last long. The outlaws weren't expecting resistance, and certainly not from both a seasoned rancher and a fierce Apache girl. They retreated in a cloud of dust, dragging their injured comrade with them, shouting curses as they vanished into the dark. Ethan stood in the settling silence, chest heaving. He glanced at Naya, who still held her bow, her face lit with grim determination. "You're damn fool brave," he said. Naya lowered her bow slowly. "Not brave. Just no choice." Ethan holstered his gun, shaking his head with a wry smile. "Guess that makes 2 of us." After the attack, Ethan doubled the patrols around the ranch. He taught Naya to shoot with a revolver, her steady hands quickly mastering the skill. She in turn showed him how to move quietly, how to track game, how to listen to the land itself. They became a team, not rancher and stray, not protector and protected, but partners in survival. At night, by the fire, they began to speak more. Naya told him stories of her childhood, of rivers and mountains her people once called home. Ethan, in return, told her about his wife, about the child he'd lost, about the years he'd spent burying his grief under work. The words didn't erase their pain, but they stitched something new between them: understanding. One night, as the fire crackled low, Naya said softly, "When I said I cannot live without a man, I meant I cannot live without someone who sees me, who lets me fight, not just die alone." Ethan's throat tightened. He reached over, placing a calloused hand gently on hers. "Well," he said gruffly, "looks like you found that someone." The days remained hard. The town's whispers didn't fade, the drought didn't ease, and the threat of the outlaws lingered. But through every hardship, Ethan and Naya faced it together. The struggle wasn't just against hunger or bullets or prejudice, it was against the crushing loneliness of the frontier. And in that battle, they were winning. The season turned slowly, the way it always did in the frontier, without fanfare, without promise. Summer's searing heat bled into autumn's dry winds, and the ranch carried on. But inside Ethan's land, something had changed. Where once there had been silence, there was now the sound of two people working side by side. The scrape of Naya's boots on the barn floor, the thud of hammer against wood as she learned to mend fence rails, the low laughter when she failed and tried again. Ethan's solitude had cracked, replaced with a rhythm that felt almost alive. Naya had long since proven her worth. She rose before the sun, sometimes even before Ethan, and set to work without complaint. She tended cattle, milked the cow, carried water, stacked firewood. She learned to ride under Ethan's patient instruction. Her back straight, her dark hair flying loose in the wind as she guided the horse with surprising instinct. Ethan found himself marveling at her progress. Where once she had been a frightened barefoot girl clutching a canteen like a lifeline, she was now confident, strong, her body hardened by labor. She laughed more often, a low, melodic sound that startled him the first time he heard it because it had been so long since laughter lived on his ranch. But for all her growth, the world outside remained unkind. Rumors in town had not died. Whispers followed Ethan whenever he came to buy supplies. Children were hushed when he walked past, and grown men eyed him with suspicion. Some even crossed the street to avoid him as though he carried a plague. Ethan bore it in silence. He wasn't one to explain himself, and he sure as hell wasn't about to justify Naya's presence to men who couldn't see past their own prejudice. But he knew what it meant. He and Naya were alone in this fight, and strangely, that truth didn't scare him. One crisp evening, after a long day of branding cattle, Ethan sat on the porch, pipe smoke curling into the night air. Naya joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, one in each hand. She set one beside him and took the other for herself, sipping carefully. "You learn fast," Ethan said, nodding toward her. She smiled faintly. "You teach slow," he chuckled, shaking his head. "Fair enough." For a while they sat in companionable silence, listening to the crickets and the distant howl of a wolf. Then Naya spoke, her voice quieter than the night. "When I first came, I said I cannot live without a man." Ethan glanced at her, waiting. "I thought I needed a shield," she continued, "someone to keep death away. But now I see, I do not live because of your shield. I live because you let me fight beside you. You did not put me in the shadow. You let me stand." Her words struck deep, cutting through Ethan's chest like a blade wrapped in warmth. He swallowed hard, staring into the dark fields. "You've done more than stand," he said quietly. "You've carried your share. Hell, you've carried mine some days." Naya tilted her head, studying him. "And you? Do you live without me?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. The question lingered between them, heavy with meaning. He thought of the long, silent years, the echo of his wife's absence, the way the ranch had felt more like a tomb than a home. And then he thought of now, the laughter, the music of her humming, the fire in her eyes when she faced down the outlaws. "No," he admitted at last. His voice was low, raw. "I reckon I don't." Their eyes met, and in that moment words became unnecessary. Something unspoken had passed between them, A bond forged not in romance alone, but in survival, trust, and the stubborn refusal to let the world break them. That bond was tested one final time. Late in autumn, a group of townsmen rode out to Ethan's ranch. Caleb Dorsey led them, flanked by 3 others, rifles slung over their shoulders. Ethan met them at the gate, his revolver at his side, but not drawn. Nia stood behind him, bow in hand. "We warned you, Cole," Caleb said coldly. "You keep that Apache girl here, you bring trouble on us all. We're here to settle it." Ethan's voice was steady, calm as still water. "She ain't leaving." "Not while I draw breath," Caleb sneered. "Then maybe you won't be breathing long." Before the standoff could turn bloody, Nia stepped forward. Her voice was clear, ringing with strength. "You say I bring trouble," she said, meeting Caleb's eyes. "But trouble came before me. Your fear, your hate, it was here already. I work, I live. I harm no one. If that is trouble, then trouble is truth." Her courage stunned even Ethan. The men shifted uneasily, their rifles lowering just slightly. Caleb's face darkened, but he wasn't a fool. He knew killing Ethan Cole on his own land would bring more trouble than it was worth. With a final curse, he spat into the dirt and turned his horse. "This ain't over," he growled. The men rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief mixing with pride. He turned to Nia. "You didn't have to speak." "Yes," she said firmly. "I did. They must hear my voice, not just yours." And in that moment, Ethan realized something profound. She was no longer the girl who had begged for shelter. She was his partner, his equal, bound not by need alone but by choice. Winter crept in, blanketing the plains in frost. The work grew harder, but the ranch endured. Together they endured. One evening, as snowflakes drifted softly against the window, Ethan found himself staring at Nia as she mended a shirt by the firelight. She hummed again, the same haunting melody, but this time it no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like hope. Ethan spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Maybe we don't live without each other." Nia looked up, her dark eyes steady. "No, we live together." He nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. And in that simple truth he found peace. The rancher had let her stay. The Apache girl had chosen to fight. And between them, in the harsh, unforgiving Wild West, they had built something stronger than fear. Something that even drought, bullets, or whispers could not tear down. A bond, a home, a life worth living.